Hello, high-tech marketers. This is Jackie Moore, and we are ready to start Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is all about the process used for strategic planning to help a company allocate its resources. And if you recall back to your Principles of Marketing class that most of you have already taken, what you recall is that Chapter 2 is always in a marketing class about this strategic planning process. And rather than repeating what you should already remember from the steps in a marketing plan outline and how a company uses the Boston Consulting Group matrix and the product market growth matrix to guide its strategy, in a high-tech marketing class, we're going to focus on new components of strategic planning that you wouldn't have previously covered. My assumption is that you already remember those things from basic marketing, and the things we're going to cover in this chapter will be added on top of the basic marketing strategic planning process. The first step in strategic planning is to make sure that we know why companies engage in strategic planning. And the basic reason is because all companies are in search of competitive advantage. Competitive advantage is what gives companies their differential benefit to customers that they serve in the marketplace. And when a company has good sources of competitive advantage, those sources should be sustainable over the long term, where the word sustainability here does not refer to environmental impacts. It refers to will be long-lived into the future. And those sources of competitive advantage need to be considered rare, and they need to be considered non-imitable by competitors, where the word non-imitable is the economist term for difficult to copy. When companies engage in marketing strategy, they are looking to allocate their scarce resources against the best opportunities emerging in the marketplace. And what we'll be covering in this chapter dovetails very nicely with a later chapter, which is Chapter 8 on the product market planning process. So keep this material in mind when we get a little bit further in the semester. As you can see here, companies have many sources of competitive advantage. And from a high-tech company's perspective, they often look at technology that's embedded in their products as one of their key assets. But the fact is that is only one source of competitive advantage. Many companies derive their competitive advantage from intangible assets, and most definitely a company's investments in branding and reputation are one of the strongest assets a high-tech company can invest in. We're going to cover branding in Chapter 12, and the phrase, "nobody ever was fired for buying IBM," captures this idea of the value of investing in intangible assets. Other intangible assets can be found in knowledge or know-how, which essentially is intellectual property. We'll be covering intellectual property as well. And a company's organizational culture, its values and beliefs about the important things and decisions that guide its internal processes are also a source of competitive advantage. Two companies that come to mind in this regard are Google, with its culture of innovativeness, as well as Zappos, for example. We'll be covering culture in Chapter 3. And finally, a company's internal routines and processes can also be a source of competitive advantage. Competencies include things such as a competency in market research. How do companies come to understand customers, trends, and customer needs? That's critically important. Routines can also include things such as manufacturing routines for zero defects, for example. And that gives you a sense of some of these internal processes and routines. One of the most important processes that high-tech companies need to dial in for competitive advantage is the new product development process. That is critical for success, and as I mentioned, we'll be covering that in Chapter 8. For our purposes in this class, we are going to define core competencies very precisely in terms of 3 underlying characteristics. The word core competency conveys a sense of what the company claims as its source of excellence, that it does better than anybody else in the industry. And for a company to make that claim, it needs to demonstrate that that core competency or capability is, first of all, difficult for competitors to imitate. So right off the bat, if something is a skill that all companies in the industry share, then it's not a core competency. Using a non-high-tech example, banks often claim that they have convenient locations and friendly tellers and good customer service. So clearly that's not difficult for competitors to imitate, and it's a widely deployed feature in the industry. A second characteristic to meet this precise definition of core competency is that whatever a company claims it is excellent in should be significantly related to the benefits that the users of the product or service receive. So an example here would be, think of how customers make decisions. For technology goods, most customers have, say, 3 to 5 important attributes or features that truly drive their decision making. So if you're going to be buying a laptop, for example, you might be talking about the speed of the processor, the RAM, the hard drive storage, if it's something that you want to be storing streaming files on. And when we get down to things like how well does the mouse clicker work, that is something that maybe is further down in a customer's consideration list, and so perhaps a company wouldn't claim something that is not significantly related to end user benefits as its source of core competency in the market. Now, of course, this seems like a far-fetched example, but in reality, engineers sometimes believe that some of the attributes of their engineering genius products are really important, when in fact if you ask a user, the user may not either understand the importance of that feature or simply may have a different perception. And finally, to be a core competency, the thing that the company excels in should allow it to grow into new product markets over time. Let's explain these 3 competencies using the metaphor of a tree. One of the most famous articles in the Harvard Business Review is by C.K. Prahalad and Gary Hamel, and it deals with how to understand these core capabilities and competencies that lead to success over time, to sustainable competitive advantage. And their example from the article deals with Honda Motor Company. If we look at the canopy, the branches of the tree, each of these branches of the tree reflects very different product markets. And what that means is there are different distribution channels for cars compared to snowblowers, compared to motorcycles. There are different industry competitors, and there are different customer buying decisions. And so the more branches that a company has on its metaphorical tree in terms of its product markets, essentially that meets this third criteria, that whatever the company is saying it excels in somehow is able to allow its canopy to grow into these new product market domains. In terms of being significantly related to end user benefits, which was the second criteria, What you see here is that the trunk of the tree is either the physical embodiment of the roots actually are the core competencies, or in the case of a service or an intangible core competence, this trunk might be characterized as core capabilities. And what you see here is that whatever is that shared component that gives rise to the canopy has to drive the way the end user receives benefits from using the product. So again, what you see here is that the thing that makes Honda so successful in so many markets is that it has this excellent capability in developing small engines. So what makes it so successful in doing that? If we look at the roots of the tree, as you see here, the roots are the underlying skills and capabilities that represent these core competencies. And in the case of Honda, as is true in the case of most high-tech companies, superior R&D is critical. We can't have a high technology without a steady stream of innovations over time that drive technology leadership in that industry. What you also see here is in the case of a physical good, Honda also excels in superior manufacturing. And you might recall that the quality control movement and zero defects came out of the Japanese industry in about the 1980s. Now what's interesting here is you also see core competencies in superior marketing and knowledge of customers. This is critically important, and Honda has developed this capability through investments over time in its people and in market research. As an example, Honda sends its executives from Japan to live in the United States in order to come to understand what we all in the United States euphemistically refer to as our love affair with the automobile. And when Honda sends its executives over, they don't live in California, which is, very progressive in terms of the United States, or on the East Coast. They send their executives to live in the breadbasket, the heart of the United States, which is the Midwest. Think of Iowa, Illinois. And of course, for those of you who have lived there and grown up there, you'll recognize that the U.S. car companies continue to have a stronghold of market share in this breadbasket of the United States. And so for Honda to credibly say that they really understand this major automotive market in the world, they actually invest in sending their people to live here to really understand what motivates American consumers in terms of how their cars fit into their lives and their lifestyle, which is critical. Corporate culture, as I've defined previously, reflects the values and beliefs that are shared by employees in a company that help guide and drive their behavior and decisions. We will be covering this in Chapter 3, and these unique corporate cultures often motivate employees who have these shared values so that the company's oars are all pulling in the same direction when they're making forward progress. Now, when I use a core competency exercise in the executive education that I do, this is one of the first exercises that I break the employees into teams to work on. And you might think that this is overly simplistic, but my experience shows me 3 things in working with high-tech companies. First of all, many high-tech companies confuse their product that they make with their core competency. And if we look at this, the product is actually the outcome of some underlying skill and capability. And it's typically a company's investments in people and brain power and know-how that actually allows them to develop these next generation technologies. And sometimes, as in the case of a company like Apple, or I would argue even Tesla, who invented the Hyperloop, whose founder invented the Hyperloop, sometimes these are actually embedded in a leader in the company. The second thing that I find in working with high-tech companies is, unfortunately, very rarely do they put anything related to customers or marketing knowledge in the roots of the tree? And the reason that I say this is very unfortunate is because we learned in Chapter 1 that the critical ingredients for success in technology markets are superior technology and superior marketing. And so for a company whose core competency analysis is lacking any roots in marketing or customer knowledge is likely doomed to failure. And so what they need to do is figure out how to make investments or hire in talent who can allow them to develop that as a critical underlying capability. The final thing that I find in working with core competencies in high-tech companies is that sometimes companies don't even agree internally on what it is that drives success. And when companies don't agree internally on what are their underlying capabilities and skills that give rise to superiority in the market, again, we don't have all those oars pulling in the same direction, and customers get confusing messages, and investors get confusing messages. And so this dialing in of what drives success is critically important in high-tech companies. And we will be doing an exercise in class to demonstrate this importance. This will be a good place to stop our first recording for Chapter 2.